Good evening. I'm Don Kerrigan with a News Center 2 special report. Joe Brennan is spending his last night as governor of Maine. He is preparing to be sworn into office as representative to Congress from Maine's 1st congressional district. Mr. Brennan goes to Washington after 8 years in the Blaine House in Augusta. Joe Brennan was elected governor of Maine in 1978, his second try for that job. He beat a Republican and an independent to win the race. He took office generally regarded as a liberal Democrat, but he leaves office tomorrow with no easy-to-apply label. Brennan has become a moderate politician. Some might even say he's become a financial conservative. He has made organized labor uncomfortable and occasionally angry, alienating a traditional Democratic ally. He has angered farmers and made a lot of people in this part of Maine complain that state government has been favoring southern Maine. But it's never that simple, of course. The governor has proven to be a real supporter of business and low-income programs, and there have been at least as many highs as lows during the Brennan administration. Tonight, we hear the governor's own thoughts on all this. News Center's Pat Callahan and I interviewed Governor Brennan a few days ago, talking with him about the Blaine House years.
Governor Brennan, for someone who doesn't know you, doesn't know Joe Brennan, how do you sell yourself to him? How do you describe who you are?
I'm not just sure I could do that. I think to find out who I am, I suppose one might take a look at where I've been, what kind of a background I come from. I come from a large family. My parents were immigrants. My father was a longshoreman. I grew up in a very working class neighborhood on Munjoy Hill, and I've worked a lot of the traditional jobs from paperboy to unloading ships to driving a truck. I spent a couple of years in the Army and spent a little time as a teacher. Graduated from law school, started practicing law, doing work in the criminal defense field, the bankruptcy field. Later became a prosecutor and served a number of years in the Maine legislature, so I've been associated with public policy most of my adult life, and the rest is pretty much on the record as Attorney General and 8 years as governor. But I suppose someone who came from a very average background probably says something about the opportunity that exists in Maine or in this nation, that I've had the honor to be able to do the things that I've been able to do.
Is there one thing in particular that's most important, you think, in formulating the kind of politician that you are, the kind of way you approach your job as governor?
I think that there is one thing. I think it's growing up in a working class neighborhood, people who struggled, and I guess really knowing that everybody isn't as lucky as I am. I have been growing up in my circumstances to be able to do the things that I could do, and I think I understand how a lot of people need a little help, just that little step up, and they can participate in what this nation offers. I guess a lot of it's like anybody, it's my background, the family I grew up in, the neighborhood I lived in.
Do you consider yourself a fairly average person who's been able to do extraordinary things?
Well, I often talk to parents who are disappointed with how their children are doing. I say, wait a second, don't give up on them. If I can do reasonably well, your children have brilliant futures, stay with them.
One of the things that's been interesting for us to watch over the years is what seems to be, at least, a swing of your personal pendulum from liberal towards the conservative side. Do you think that's happened?
Well, I think I'm a little more conservative than when I first came to the legislature some 22 years ago, and that's because of different experiences I've had as a lawyer, as a legislator, as a prosecutor, so I'm probably much more middle of the road. At one time, I thought government could do a lot more than I think it can do now. I think government has a lot of responsibilities. It can do a lot of good. It does a lot of good, but I don't want to overdo it. Yes, I've gotten more conservative.
What sorts of things? Was government never able to do as much as you thought it could, or has government changed? Have the people changed, and has the ability of government changed?
Well, I think that government can still do an awful lot of good things like we're doing with our housing programs when other states weren't doing much to help people that needed help. Government still got a great responsibility. It does so well with our institutions. If anyone's been to Augusta Mental Health or Bangor Mental Health recently, you can see some of the good things we're doing for some of our citizens that aren't so fortunate in life. But I also understand individuals' initiative, that we don't want to dampen that. Don't pass a law or a rule unless it really makes some sense, unless you really believe it's going to improve society.
Conservative or liberal, a lot of people have a tough time pinning you down. It's hard to describe you as a traditional Democrat, at least for some people. For example, your relationship with labor in the state of Maine. You mentioned you come from a working class background. Traditionally, the Democrats are pretty tight with labor. What has been your relationship with them, and Has it been what you wanted it to be?
Well, I was always supported by labor. This last time when I ran for Congress, they did not endorse me. Much of that was due to the fact that I felt that we needed to revise some of our laws dealing with workers' compensation, not to hurt working men and women, but it was my view that the best benefits in the world are really an illusion if they're not tied to a job. I was very terribly concerned that we were losing job opportunities because of the cost of doing business in the state. But even in the last election, much of the money I got to conduct my campaign came from labor unions. They still basically retained that confidence in me that I was committed to helping a lot of the working men and women. I think the difference is I'm not sort of a knee-jerk liberal and things of that sort. If I, even though that may be the traditional view, not to make any changes in workers' comp, I arrived at a conclusion that it had to be done in the best interest of the working people, so I did it. I incurred the wrath of some people, and it had some political cost, but it was cost that I was prepared to accept.
I think a lot of people have been surprised or disappointed in your fiscal conservatism.
Well, I believe that we have to be fiscally responsible. It's one of the strange things. Take a look at this administration over the last several years. Our credit rating has been improved by Wall Street. We look at President Reagan, Washington, running $200 billion deficits as a matter of course. I think that's morally irresponsible. I believe that we ought to pay for the things that we use today for the most part. And I believe we ought to be fiscally responsible. We're helped, of course, because the laws of the state, in essence, encourage us to balance budgets and things of that sort. But I believe in that anyway. In fact, I support a balanced budget amendment nationally. I don't think it's a cure-all, nor do I think it's a panacea. But it might help to encourage some fiscal discipline in Washington.
Well, let's talk a little bit, if we could, about the state's economy, how it's changed over the last 8 years. Generally, things have improved, but is that because just nationally things have gotten better, or is it because of something specific your administration has done?
Well, I think first, a lot of good things have happened in the northeastern part of the United States. This region is doing extremely well. If the region's doing well, Maine's going to get its benefits. So that was important. But I think we've done a lot of things to help. You know, we've worked on economic development. Things like the changes we made in workers' compensation, they are helpful. We made a first-rate commitment to improve our roads and our bridges and things of that sort, and that is happening. We're really investing in education. Much of that's going to pay off down the road. Probably one of the best things my administration has done. But a lot of it is due to the region, but I think there's been a receptive business atmosphere in the state. Company after company that has come here, that we've encouraged to come here, they'll say after they're here a year or two, they really like it. And really what it says most about are the people of Maine. It's that work ethic. I like to say that in Maine, if people get a job, they not only go to work every day, they actually work when they get there. That really says a lot about Maine.
Is that still true?
Oh, I think that's still true. Talk with people that have companies in different states. They'll continue to talk about the Maine work ethic. Yes, it is. Will you find an occasional situation where somebody's grumbling? Sure, you're going to. But overall, the Maine work ethic, it's the Maine people that make this state what it is.
But there are Maine work ethic people in northern and eastern Maine as well, yet the development hasn't happened there the way it has in southern Maine.
Well, that's what I was saying. Much of this is due to the region. Much of it is spillover from Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and so forth. The Northeast is doing well. The Northeast has a lot of good things going for it. Certainly things around Boston with the great institutions, what took place in regard to some of the high-tech companies and things of that sort. And then a lot of them are coming here because they like the quality of life. Mm-hmm. They like, again, the work ethic, and they like the uncrowded spaces.
But how do you spread that out? How do you get it to go to northern Maine, to eastern Maine?
We've worked at it in my administration where we had discretionary monies with community development block grants, for example. Disproportionately, those monies went to eastern Maine and to northern Maine. We tried to help out with our fish piers, with our cargo port type efforts, with our efforts down in Eastport, with our potato packing sheds to try to help the potato industry up in the northern part of the state. So we've made specific efforts. Maine is enjoying the very best of times in its history, but it's not even across the board. It's better in some sections, but we're conscious of that, and we're actually made definite decisions to try to help to spread the wealth, so to speak.
Do you think that that Aroostook County, Washington County, Piscataquis County, let's pick those three places in particular, and maybe Penobscot County and some others, Waldo to an extent, people in those areas will believe they've been ignored by Augusta? Do you think that they've been kind of shuffled off to the side, at least until recently, while Southern Maine has been given all the opportunity in the world to prosper?
I don't think that's the general impression. Talk to people like Harry Vose, one of the legislators from Washington County. Talk to a number of people down there, and I think generally they'll say they don't know of an administration that has made a deeper, a bigger commitment to try to aid them economically. I don't agree. I mean, there may be some people who'll say that, sure. But people that have been involved, that have worked with my administration, I think for the most part, will say that the Brennan administration was there to try to assist them with economic development. That's true in the Bangor area, where we worked with the company in Brewer recently. Some years ago, where we worked with the Bangor airport. But it's been true in a lot of those places. Anyone's kidding themselves if they think that somebody can sit here in Augusta and just turn the economy on in Washington County, Piscataquis County, or Aroostook. You can't do it. You can try to help set the conditions that'll be helpful. You can take on specific tasks, whether it's a cargo port or something of that sort, or a specific company, and try to react to help. What we do overall, though, is this investment in education is probably going to do as much as anything to help those areas.
You had a lot of people who were involved with the initiative to get Lemforder Corporation to expand in Brewer, which you just alluded to, told us that they came away from that with a fairly strong impression that state government in Maine didn't really have the development tools that it needed to lure business.
Well, there's a company that did come here. They came to state government. My office worked very closely with the legislators from those areas, and as a result, we were effective. I think overall, the state has responded. We responded to Pratt Whitney going back some years ago. We responded to Bath Iron Works. We responded to Lemforder. If there's a good project or a good proposal, there's a lot of willingness in Augusta, not just with the governor, but with the legislature to try to help. I think people understand pretty much what I've said for so many years, that the best human service program is a job. And those are good jobs, whether it's Lemforder, Bath Iron Works, things of that sort.
Let's talk a little bit about the way you've set up your administration, the way things have worked over 8 years. You'll always hear the charge from whatever party's out of power that, oh, it's political patronage. He's just giving his friends the jobs. What about that?
I don't know who the person would be. Let me say this, that political patronage, say there are people I worked with in campaigns, that I worked with as a legislator, that I thought were very capable. And sure, I asked them to come into government. There were a number of them. Commissioner Michael Petit, controversial, very able, probably the ablest Commissioner of Human Services this state has seen. Was he involved in my campaign? Yes, to a limited extent. That shouldn't disqualify a person. Back some years ago, Michael Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts, if anybody worked in his campaign, they couldn't go to work for the administration. He lost the next time, he ran.
Right.
That rule hasn't prevailed since. I mean, there's nothing mutually exclusive about being very capable politically and having the skills and the talents to run a department. In fact, sometimes they do the very best. Many of our commissioners have been former legislators, people that have had to go out in their district and seek support. I think they have a little understanding of people. They have an understanding of their problems. And I think if you read some of the newspapers recently that have been summing up my 8 years as governor, virtually all of them will say that it's been very successful. I think the reason for some of that success is some of the able people I brought in to government. Now, many of them had had experiences as legislators. Rod Scribner, absolutely a magician in regard to finances and running the Department of Finance and Administration. Former legislator, someone who's been around. One might say he's political. He's been involved. What is politics
But
about
they're getting
anyway?
the job done.
Yeah, I mean, actually, if you get people that have been associated with the political process, which I think is about the highest calling where you can do more to affect the lives of people than any other field I know, I think that's very healthy. I appreciate there are negative images with political people, but if you get to know them, and you find most people in this state, they'll have high regard for their own legislator. It's those other politicians they don't know. So getting back to bringing people in that work with me politically, yes, I did. Have they done a good job? I believe so. The test, newspapers that aren't particularly friends of mine have said, yes, Brennan's administration has done a good job almost any way you score it.
You have mentioned, both with us and in a number of your speeches and your campaign speeches too, the efforts to improve education, the university workers' comp, a variety of those things, roads you mentioned a few minutes ago. In each of those situations, it seemed that we were in a crisis already before state government came in to try to rescue us from it. As you know, of course, there's been the comment that it's been management by crisis. Is that true, and is it avoidable at all?
No, I don't think it was a management by crisis. Take education. It wasn't a crisis. There was a lot of things happening on the national level. When I decided to put together a first-rate commission headed up by President Reynolds of Bates College to look at some of the problems in primary and secondary education, they made some recommendations, and then I carried the ball right through the legislature to get that done. There wasn't a crisis in my judgment.
But there was an overwhelming, certainly national outcry already in existence to do something to tighten up, improve, upgrade education. And we heard some of that here as well.
But you take any year since they started educating people, people say there's something wrong with education. It's not working. There's a crisis. The fact is, we put together, I think, a responsible program. We got it through the legislature. There is a certain momentum. But I don't think it's by crisis whatsoever. But you're going to have crises in state government. But you can only, you're going to take certain things on in certain years. But there isn't anything in state government that can't be improved. If people want to call it a crisis, sure, they're free to. But I don't think it's that's a fair assessment.
Let's take a couple of those other ones. The university.
Well, the University of Maine, it had its problems before I got to be governor. They didn't get much money. I think the previous 4 years to my first administration, their average increase in resources was something like 1%. So they were struggling. During my first 4 years, that went up 8 or 9, 10%, something of that order. There is no question that the university was having problems. But as we recognized those problems, again, we put together a first-rate visiting committee. They made recommendations. We carried out virtually every single one of them. But I don't think it was any crisis. I think universities have to be examined every once in a while. That's why we put together this distinguished visiting committees. Some of the very best universities in this nation, they'll be examined periodically, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20-year periods, to see what can be done better to make it more functional.
But the university, in a lot of people's minds, had gotten into such disarray that you were forced to appoint a special Blue Ribbon Committee to look at it and figure out, good grief, what the heck is wrong with this outfit? What are we going to do to straighten it out?
Well, first, a lot of good things were happening in the university for the last 8 years. There was some discontent, but that'll take place in universities and public universities across this nation. I say that there was a time for a visiting committee. They had something similar to that 15 or 20 years ago. In 15 or 20 years from now, they'll do the very same thing. And as I said, there's hardly an institution associated with state government that we can't do better with. I happen to think most things in Maine, though, right now are in pretty good shape.
One of the things that's been controversial many times, off and on, keeps coming back during your 8 years, has been Maine Yankee, the issue of nuclear power. Both of the referendums to close it down, your position was, financially, we really can't do it, so you opposed the shutdown. Have you changed your feelings at all personally? Would you just as soon see it shut down?
Oh, very definitely. First, I got to deal with the federal government when they very recklessly decided they might want to put a nuclear dump up around Sebago Lake and another one in a bad place in northeasterly Maine. Then I saw the situation with the Challenger, where some might argue we didn't know enough to keep that out of the coal.
Mm-hmm.
We had that great tragedy. We've had the situation with Chernobyl, and we've seen the consequences hundreds and hundreds of miles away in Sweden, where a lot of reindeer are going to have to be slaughtered. And just the fact that we've had civilian use of nuclear power over 40 years, we still don't know where we're going to put it. The fact that the plant is getting a little bit older. The combination of all of these circumstances lead me to the conclusion that it's appropriate to close Maine Yankee. Under the present law, though, we can't do it in Maine because the federal government has preempted this area of activity. In the United States Congress, I hope to change the law so that Maine can make its own decision. And I would vote to close Maine Yankee. I think alternative sources are available. But for those reasons mentioned, yes, I did change my mind.
Was this something that you had been thinking about anyway? Some might say that, gee, it's a pretty dramatic turnaround for the man who said, don't close it a couple years ago.
Yeah, I didn't do this helter-skelter just off the top of my head. Back in February or so, I was at a meeting with several thousand people in Portland, speaking out against the conduct of the Department of Energy in trying to locate a dump in Sebago Lake. At that time, I was bothered very deeply about the idea of being willing to produce nuclear waste, but at the same time not being willing to accept any risk whatsoever for its disposal. That bothered me. And I said back at that time that I would re-examine my position in regard to Maine Yankee. And what I did is I put together a group with our planning office, some very, very able people that worked on it, people like Peter Bradford, who served on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, some very other able people in the state government. They analyzed a lot of the issues. They came to me with a report. I reviewed that very, very carefully, and then for the other reasons mentioned with the challenge at Chernobyl, frankly, some of my confidence in our technical capacity has lessened considerably. I came to the conclusion that it was time to close that plant, and I would vote to close it.
A cornerstone of your political life really has been a desire to help out the people who need help, the handicapped, mentally retarded, elderly, children. Do you think, in a general sense, have you done all you could do to reach out to those people?
Well, I'll say this, that it was very heartwarming for me to go through Augusta Mental Health, Bangor Mental Health just a few days ago, to go to a group home for our retarded citizens. It was very impressive. I think a lot of good things have been done, and yes, I do deeply believe that government has that responsibility to take care of those in the dawn of life, the children, the twilight of life, the elderly, and the shadows of life, the handicapped. I think that's what social justice is about. Have we done it perfectly? No. Have we made a lot of progress? I'd say very definitely.
Along those same lines, there are continuing complaints from both sides, and maybe there always will be, about our welfare programs, and that we're not doing enough either to help people get along and to help them get out of the welfare system. Is that an inevitable problem is that something that state government can't deal with?
Well, I think our program should be aimed at trying to get those who are capable of working back to work. That's what people want to do. They don't just want to get a check from the government. Many of them aren't in a position to work, some due to health conditions, some due to age, sometimes a very young mother with 2 or 3 little children under 5 or 6 years of age. They can't. But our programs have been aimed in that direction to try to get them independence. And I've had a chance to see where some of them have worked. I've gone to some work sites where I met with a woman. She had 3 children. She was on AFDC. Through a program of state government, we got her into a training program. And then we got her a job. Now she's been working for a couple of years, and she really spoke with a special poignancy when she told me it was so nice to go through the supermarket without having food stamps. And she said the following week she was going to buy a car. I saw just dignity come alive for that person because of the independence she got, and she was so appreciative of the help she got in a state program. That's just one example. There are many, many more. Can we do more? Can we do better? Yes.
A couple of years ago, you had to wrestle with the question of whether to run for the U.S. Senate. You ultimately decided not to. You've now won an election to Congress. Did you ever think at a point, gee, maybe I've done enough, it's time to get a job somewhere else? I imagine probably find a nice paying job with a law firm somewhere.
You know, I think about that from time to time, but I honestly am concerned with the issues facing this nation. I'm very much concerned with our involvement in Nicaragua. I talked about it repeatedly in the campaign. I absolutely cannot see who gave the right to this great nation to try to overthrow a government down there, a tiny government, 3 million people or so. So I'd feel guilty standing on the sidelines. I can get down and I can vote against that conduct of this nation. And I am bothered by the nuclear arms race. I am bothered. I mean, I don't support every weapons system that comes down the pike, as some people in Congress apparently do. So I don't want to just stand around and complain. I knew I had a reasonable chance to win. So I would have felt guilty, as I said, standing on the sidelines. That's why I decided to make the race. And I'm excited about going to Washington so I can do some work in these areas. Back at that time, in regard to Senator Cohen, a lot of people urged me to make the race. I thought about it very carefully, but what was really the deciding factor is I had sought re-election for 4 years, and the people in every county in this state supported me overwhelmingly. And I think when you ask to serve them in the high office as governor for 4 years, I came to the conclusion I ought to serve those 4 years, and that's why I stayed with the office.
Obviously, a whole bunch of new challenges facing you in Congress. How much will your experience as governor help you both deal with those and achieve some sort of status among your peers to give you a bit of rank?
Well, I think any experience you have in government, if I had 2 terms in the Maine legislature before going off to Congress, that would be helpful. But the fact that I have 4 terms, plus being a prosecutor and attorney general and governor for 8 years, that's a broad base of experience. That's going to help me. I think all of us, and as I get a little older, I get more respect for experience. It used to be the energy and the vigor and the vision of youth, but now I value experience. But I think it'll be terribly helpful.
What do you think you'll miss most? Is there one thing about your years in the Blaine House, and even before that, the work you've done here in Maine?
Oh, the Blaine House, living here has been very special for my family. being governor where you can set the agenda. I wanted to take on the issue of drunk driving. I took it on, and I think we reduced highway deaths. And it's easy to be effective as governor. You know, you speak with one voice. Some of the things we took on in regard to the mentally ill, the retarded citizens, I'm probably going to miss that type of opportunity where you could do it, you could see the results of your work. Going down to Congress, I'll be one of 435 in one side of the building. There's another 100 down the other side, then there's a president. But I'm going down and work for the things that I talked about in my campaign. It's not going to be as easy to make the mark or the impression as I believe it is as a governor, particularly of a state the size of Maine, which is a delightful sized state to be governor of.
Let me ask you, give you the chance to get on the soapbox for just a couple seconds here, and we have less than a minute left. How would you like people after January 8th to think about your 8 years as governor? How would you like people to look back on Joe Brennan as governor?
Well, I hope they look back on the fact that we ran an honest administration, that we took on the important things like the investment in our future through education. We didn't forget our old commitments to trying to help those who were left behind. And at the same time, we understood economic development. And because of that, we made some efforts that have meant many, many jobs for people in this state. I guess, in a nutshell, though, that I hope they remember that I tried to do the very best that I was capable of doing.
Have you been a good governor, do you feel?
Well, I think somebody else has to say that, but I suggest you read the newspapers and some of the lengthy accounts of what we've been doing for the last 8 years, and I think the newspapers have been pretty solidly with us. I'm not saying there's a paper in the northern part of the state that's never been my head cheerleader. I don't expect it, but I think some of the newspaper people, no close friends of mine, they've generally given the administration very high grades. Former governors who were interviewed gave us very high grades. I think we have a very, very positive record.
Thank you very much, Governor. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Joe Brennan leaves the Blaine House with a slightly more realistic view about the limits of government, that not every problem is best solved by a taxpayer-financed program or a new law. But he also leaves with the conviction that government can do a great deal of good. And there has also been some noticeable change in the man himself. Brennan has grown in the job. He has become far more confident, more able to relax around people, even reporters. One of my favorite images will be from the night we played pool with Joe Brennan, the hustler. Even with the camera rolling, he joked about his low-income upbringing as he won every game very easily. The pool player, the gardener, the occasional jogger, and always the politician. Joe Brennan leaves office loved by some, despised by a few, but respected by almost everyone. Respected as a man who gave himself totally to the job and did it the way he thought best. Tomorrow, a new job for Brennan and a new governor for Maine. We'll be in Augusta live tomorrow for the inauguration of John McKernan. Until then, for Pat Callahan, I'm Don Kerrigan. Good night for News Center.